its findings to date at that point and said, here are the constraints to the road, here's what we know, here's what's possible in the space. And that was really after several years of planning, public outreach, and detailed engineering work. And at that meeting, you asked the task force to go back and make a recommendation so that you could potentially act on that. And the task force did that, but first it held another community informational meeting here in April, just to ensure that all the task force members and the public had the opportunity again to get a deeper understanding of the constraints on Lake Mansfield Road and what had to be dealt with in that space and what was possible in that space. And then at a following meeting in May, the task force deliberated and made a recommendation. Actually made two recommendations. The first recommendation, as is set forth in the letter to you dated June 18th, is that the task force recommends Lake Mansfield Road be closed long-term, permanently closed to vehicular traffic between the boat launch and the beach. Now, some exception could be made for emergency access and some limited access to the residents and to the pool club, but generally the road would be closed. The task force arrived at that decision after a bit of discussion and deciding that the best solution long-term for the health of the lake, for that ecosystem and for that recreation area, is that a road for vehicles not be in that space. It bears mentioning that it is the least expensive solution is to close the road to vehicular traffic. It is not a no-expense solution because the bank edge would still have, the lake edge would still have to be stabilized and some sort of path be achieved in there. And some access for the existing driveways would have to be maintained. So it's not a no-cost solution, but it's certainly the lower-cost solution. Recognizing that that may not be to the select board's liking, although it is the task force's preferred option. The second option is to make the road one way from the boat launch northbound towards the beach, and then from the beach parking lot to Christian Hill, that would remain two-way. There would be limited access, of course, to the pool club and to the residents. Any option, sorry?
Yeah, that access would be from the south to the north. The only way
Correct.
The pool club and the residents get there is from
Correct.
the south to the north.
There are small details in either design that can still be worked out. The design, both designs need to provide for stabilization of the road, mitigation of stormwater, stabilization of the lake bank, recreating and strengthening the lakeside buffer, and if it's a one-way road, to employ some traffic calming measures to enhance the safety for everybody who uses that space, including those walking or biking. At this point, the task force thinks the select board has enough information to make a decision. And the task force thinks that it's important to make a decision at this point to give us a design direction so that we know, are we hiring an engineer to develop designs for just a recreation path and a stabilization of the lake bank? Or are we getting into something different, and are we designing for vehicular access? That matters because how much are we going to spend? What grants will we seek for design and construction? And if we don't start that process, with a trajectory, some details still to be worked out, then we'll lose the opportunity, I think, to capitalize on grants that may be out there for these scenarios. So again, the task force at your direction has been working on this for many, many years and quite in depth for the last 4 to 5 years, including public outreach, public meetings, and some detailed planning and engineering studies. So we think at this point, you have the information to make a decision, and many task force members are here. If you have questions, our engineer is here if you have questions. So I'll turn it over to you.
Any questions, comments? And I'll take public comment too.
So I have one question. I think when we talked about closing the road, we have to provide access to a couple of places that exist on that road. They'd have to go from south to north to access, but wouldn't they then have to continue north if it's a one-way sort of scenario, or would that be a two-way road to access those? I missed that meeting.
So some particulars would still have to be worked out. Whether the road is closed or is one way, the existing residents at 30 Lake Mansfield Road and the pool club, they would still need access, either both ways or just from the north. Or just arriving from the south and leaving from the north. So we understand access must be provided, and we'll figure that out.
I don't know if the task force looked into this, if the road is closed, people who have come down, like, I don't know if it's turned into Lake Mansfield Road yet, or if it's still Hollenbeck, have to turn around, or they'll be circling up through Nob Hill and through a private road. And if they want to use the park, they have to park, and we have 6 spots there, I think, in the, was thought given to that?
Yes. Parking and turnaround and circulation at the south end of the lake has been discussed for a long time. There's not much room in that space, so if the road was completely closed to traffic, people would, unless you had plenty of advanced signage, no through traffic ahead, people would have to negotiate a turnaround and go back out. There's not much option for additional parking at the south end. So parking for the recreation space would be limited at the south end to basically what you've got there now, 5, 6 spaces at the boat launch. But the forest and beach parking would be at the north end at the beach and would remain there. So people wanting to use that space in a closed road scenario would enter from the north.
Please.
I want to commend the Lake Mansfield Task Force for all the work that they put into this, and I just wanted to say that I'm actually in favor of closing it entirely, and I believe this gives us an opportunity to create a sanctuary and create a refuge for the town, and make it a shining centerpiece of Great Barrington. It gives an opportunity for us to connect the trails through the woods and from downtown. It gives the fishermen and the fishing derby and people that use the road right now a place that they feel safe to connect with nature. It's the least expensive option. It's inexpensive compared to trying to make it one way. I think that is a big part of this that we need to take on board. The fact that the emergency vehicles are okay with having it closed to traffic, that says a lot. That was one of my concerns, but when I came back and I read this, that made me feel a lot better. I think signage is going to be important, so if it is closed, I feel that in time people will realize that they can't access the beach from coming from the hill, the Castle Hill. And I just think that this gives us a real opportunity to create a sanctuary and a refuge and a place that Great Barrington can feel proud of, and that we can market as our space that Great Barrington can come together and really support our ecosystem. And I'm very much in favor of closing the traffic on the Mansfield Road.
So I'm going to take public comment if the board is present. So anyone who wants to come up, just state your name and address, and you have up to 3 minutes to speak.
Third time's a charm. Okay, 3 minutes. I'll try to make it quick. Oh, sorry. David Ryle, live on 85 Christian Hill Road. Let's see. I understand why the folks on the south side of the lake don't want traffic coming through their neighborhood. I get it. Nobody wants traffic in their neighborhood. However, a proposal that infringes on the rights of others and creates problems for others is not a solution. And that is exactly what the task force is proposing. Not only does the task force proposal violate town bylaws by restricting access to health care, but it also pushes their traffic problem onto Christian Hill Road and Main Street. Diverting more traffic onto Christian Hill Road, where there are no sidewalks and vehicles are going 45, is not safer than on Hollenbeck, where there are sidewalks and vehicles are going maybe 30. This task force proposal will therefore increase the risk of accidents on Christian Hill Road and put another 500 cars onto Main Street every day, neither of which are good ideas. So the big question is, what should be done with the road? I think it's safe to assume that virtually everyone in town agrees that the 300 feet or so of lake edge in front of the Whale Rock needs to be stabilized. But are we really going to spend at least $1 million that the task force plan requires, and probably a whole lot more, to stabilize the length of a football field, especially considering that the rest of the road is in pretty decent shape and would only cost $50,000 to repave? It just doesn't make any sense. Regardless, the task force is asking you to either close down the road or make it one way south to north. If the select board decides to close down the road or recommend closing down the road to the town meeting, you'd be restricting access to health care and decrease ambulance response times, neither of which are good ideas. Granted, you would save a little bit of money on the road. However, if you're going to keep emergency access to that road, it's still going to need to be repaired. So this is not putting in a gravel bike path. The road's still going to have to be repaired. Or, if the selectman decides to make the road one way, south to north, the alternative proposal, you would still be restricting access to health care for those residents on the north side of the lake, but the town wouldn't save money. The task force can't even tell you how much their proposal is going to cost, and they're essentially asking for a blank check. Please don't give it to them. Approving a plan with unknown costs is fiscally irresponsible and not in the best interest of the town. It's imperative to realize that these are not the only two options available to you. You can choose to do neither, or you could choose to make the road one way north to south. Making the road one way north to south would alleviate the healthcare access issue. But the task force doesn't want that because they don't want the traffic in their neighborhood. At the meeting in May, the task force specifically said that they didn't want anybody having to turn around in the newly expanded boat launch area. It just shows you that they're more concerned over traffic in their neighborhood than they are for healthcare access for their neighbors. The most sensible option, however, is to widen the road near Whale Rock back to the utility pole right of way, and that would give you another 6 feet to stabilize the rock edge and keep it two-way. And if you don't want to keep it two-way, you could make it a one-way covered bridge type of situation, stop signs on either end. That option was discussed in the task force meeting in mid-May, and it makes far more sense than closing it down altogether.
Your time's just about up.
So, therefore, I'm asking you to uphold the bylaws of the town, consider alternative plans than they're giving you to this, and authorize a temporary repaving of the road to prevent asphalt from crumbling into the lake for the next 2 years.
Next.
3 minutes on the dot?
No, 4 minutes on the dot.
Oh, sorry.
Anyone else want to speak?
My name is George Guerrero from Deacon Road. We collected over 1,000 signatures in favor of two-way traffic.
Can you get a little louder, George? No,
It's not a microphone.
It's for cable.
Yeah, just a little louder, George, please.
We collected over 1,000 signatures from the town voters, and it was way over 1,000 signatures in favor of two-way traffic. Um, the other town manager, she had the original signatures. In case they don't have it, I have a copies over here. Over 1,000 signatures of people who want the two-way traffic. So I would like you to take a good consideration of that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steve Farina, 87 Railroad. I just want to agree with David.
Right.
I like the covered bridge idea, being able to, it would keep it two-way. You could do it simply with a traffic light or stop signs, just like when there was construction on Bridge Street. It's a simple way to manage traffic. You can still have the flow, you can still have your embankments and not close the road off. I'm concerned about the traffic flow. Sorry, I was not involved with any of these meetings. I haven't heard anything about any traffic studies on any of the side roads. I would think that would be a major critical factor that should be taken into account.
Anyone else? Let's see. Let's go a couple more.
Dan Bailey, 207 North Street in Housatonic. What happens if there are no grants available?
Money has to be approved at the town meeting. There's been no money approved.
I think the town meeting will approve that kind of money.
Right, any plan.
Any plans?
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Katie Tomer. I live on the north end of Lake Mansfield Road, Gihan, Lake Mansfield. Please keep it two ways. There's no problem with keeping it two ways. I got a sick husband, and I'm up there in age, need access to the hospital. Thank you.
Hello, Dale Abrams, 6 Lake Mansfield Road, and a member of the Lake Mansfield Improvement Task Force. You've heard things tonight that are compelling in terms of this concern about access to the healthcare resources. But at more than one point in the 10-year process, the emergency services were engaged in the process of evaluating whether a change to Lake Mansfield Road would negatively impact their ability to access people in a crisis. And their answer was no, it would not affect that. So I think that's really important to restate. Earlier on in Chris's presentation, he talked about the space available and how limited that was. The engineering study defined that there was roughly, on average, about an 18-foot space available, 18-foot wide space available in the road corridor. If we went with that option of a one-way road or a two-way road, that uses up that entire space, either through two really narrow lanes or with a 12-foot wide average road lane and a 6-foot wide bike path. That leaves almost nothing left on the shoreline. The shoreline varies from about 0 feet in the Whale Rock area and extending north and south along that to maybe a 2-foot section to the most robust areas are maybe 10 feet wide, maybe 12 feet wide. Trees are falling off that edge and dying on that edge. There's very little vegetation holding that shoreline together. When we met last time as a board, Shep Evans from the Conservation Commission, or our conservation agent, and Jeff Cohen, who represents the Conservation Commission, said what we really need to do if we're looking at our town now and into the future is expect that traffic is going to increase and that our resources are going to come under pressure. The lake is a one-of-a-kind resource in our community. It's in the 18 years that I've lived here, recreational use has only increased, and it's diverse folks. It's people from New York State and Sheffield and all over the place, because I live nearby and I talk to those folks. It's a precious and heavily used and prized resource in our community. Doing the choice of going with the road closure allows us to have at most a 12-foot developed area for a nice wide path area through there, and leaves the remainder of the area, or greater than 50% possibly, to be restored as a natural area. As Shep said, the lake is number one. That's the priceless thing. The shoreline habitat, that's critical. It's been degraded for 50 to 70 years, and it's our time to make a statement to protect that shoreline, to protect that lake resource, so that when our kids' kids are around, that same space is there, and it's in better shape than now, where they can safely walk that shoreline, safely fish that shoreline, safely birdwatch along that shoreline, safely push that stroller, safely push that walker. That's the resource that we have there. Thank you.
Anyone else? Chris, go. And then last question.
Oh, just to reiterate, the task force is comprised of representatives from various boards and committees. At your direction, Conservation Commission, Parks Commission, Planning Board, Select Board, and citizens at large. The task force does not come at this with any preconceived notion to arrive at a decision at what's best for one neighborhood or another. And in fact, when the task force came to you 2 years ago, you said, thank you for the report. Go back and please see if a two-way road can work. We did detailed engineering to see how much room there was to work with, and it's already been said tonight that there's only about 18 feet you can work with. It doesn't matter how much rock you blast or how much the lake you take. There are constraints on all sides. Property line constraints, there's wetland constraints. There are simply realistic constraints about cost, permitting, and timelines if you're working outside of that 18-foot corridor. That's just the facts. A two-way road would be awfully tight in 18 feet. It's tempting to think that traffic lights could work at both ends, the sort of covered bridge, one-lane bridge, stop and wait scenario for somebody to come past. That's fine if there's 100 feet, 200 feet, maybe a couple hundred feet between you and the car over there, or that you're waiting for the stoplight. If the distance between one stopped car and the other stopped car is 1,000 feet, even 500 feet, you're waiting a long time for a green light, somebody to go through, and then for the car to clear, and then you can go. This is a long scenario. We have done traffic studies, and there are about 500 cars a day, more or less. Depends on the day, depends on the weather. This is not a significant amount of traffic for Main Street, which carries between 20 and 25,000 cars a day. But it is a significant number for Lake Mansfield Road and for that ecosystem. So we have looked at these things not from a preconceived position, but as a comprehensive viewpoint, and we've done detailed engineering at your request. And so here we are.
Kate, if you do have a question.
I did, but it was actually answered.
Okay, please, go ahead.
I would just appeal to the board to be forward-thinking and really look at this as an opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. That we really, really can create a sanctuary and a refuge for our children, for our grandkids, for an opportunity to link Main Street through the trails, through Lake Mansfield. And it's one of these things that, if properly marketed, it could be a centerpiece for Great Barrington. There's not that many towns that have this wonderful resource and that have this opportunity to really envelop it and wrap our arms around it. And I really think that the task force has done their due diligence. And I think that we should listen to their recommendations. As they said, it was a mixture of folks. It's not a neighborhood lake, it's a Great Barrington lake. And it appeals to so many people, so many demographics. And we have to kind of, get out of this thing of feeling like it's going to only appeal to the people on the hill. It's not. We're trying to create something that the entire town can wrap their arms and be happy and proud, and that we can have fishing derbies, and we can have people walking on the lake, that kids could learn to ride their bikes, that there's this sense of refuge and sanctuary, and we're helping an ecosystem. And I really appeal to the board to look ahead and be forward-thinking and not be afraid to take this leap. And it's been years and years and years. They came back and did a feasibility study, and this is their recommendation. So for us to disregard that, I think we would be doing disservice to the task force. So I really appeal for you to just be forward thinking and just look at the big picture, look at the big picture.
I do actually have a question. If I remember from taking my kids to Lake Mansfield, that is the bus go? The bus is not on a bus route.
No.
I mean, I guess my one concern, and that kind of answers that, is when I think of, and what I was doing when it looked as though I wasn't paying attention, I was pulling up the open space and recreation plan that we have to see where kind of Lake Mansfield fit on that, and that was one of the recommendations, was to try to find an answer in a period of time, and to really kind of grow that it's home base. And then I think about what I think of accessibility, and do we create this sanctuary, but is all of Great Barrington able to access it? And I had this moment of feeling like I do occasionally see a bus, but it must be completely in my imagination, but not wanting to create something that not everybody can get to. And I realize that in that there are people that rely on public transportation to get to where they want to go and to be with other families. But I don't think that's an issue here, but I think it to me it's something that I think of as a concern, and maybe as we get to the other end of our meeting this evening, we can talk about ways to make sure that that is something that's accessible, even if the bus ends up at the boat launch or something like that. So.
Ben, 2 questions.
Yeah, was north to south considered in a one-way, and why was that not recommended? Remember?
North to south was not recommended because it's the same question you raised if it was closed altogether. If people coming from the south couldn't proceed north, there would be a strange bottleneck situation, and cars may be taking Nob Hill, which is partially private. So one of the reasons to make it not north to south was because people coming from the south wouldn't have a good way to turn around and go back. And there wasn't sufficient room, more than 5 or 6 spaces, to park many cars at the south end. But there is room at the north end for people who are traveling southwards to stop. Oh, I can't go any further south because cars are only coming north. I can't go any further south. There is room there at the beach to turn around. We can design for that if we know what we're designing for. At the south end, that room doesn't exist. So that's why from south to north.
And if we do opt to close it entirely, the plan to deal with the lack of turnaround and parking is clear signage a block sooner saying no through traffic.
Right.
I see. Okay.
We'll take a couple more and then we'll close off comments.
Sharon Gregory, 32 Hollenbeck.
You don't have to move the mic, it's for TV, not
Okay.
for amplification.
I would like to second what Lee has to say. To me, I've gone to pretty much every Lake Mansfield discussion over a period of years now, and I do feel the recommendation is excellent. It was hard. I know it was hard, but this is really about the environment and people. It's not about cars. I live close enough to the street. My stairs start probably 5 feet behind the sidewalk. And I see traffic, and I hate to tell you, but they're at 45. Many residents on Hollenbeck have clocked them. So that's a problem everywhere. And I don't really want to make it one neighborhood versus another. This has to do with our resource. And I do walk the Lake Mansfield Road just to see what's happening and also for some exercise. There are many people in danger, and people can say, oh, nobody's been hit yet. I mean, there are cars swerving, and so, we've been able to get around it. But there are little kids fishing all the time and older people fishing. There are mothers pushing their strollers. Well, you could say, well, they shouldn't push strollers near there. They shouldn't go to the lake, but really, they need to. So I really think that we have to do the right thing for people and for
for resources. I've had an open heart surgery. I know what it is to be. It's only a year. You know, I have to walk and get that exercise and so forth. I know that you can go around Division Street. We didn't always have a paved road on Lake Mansfield Road. And I know it's scary sometimes when you think about it, going a longer way, but Division Street is really not that far, and it's really paved in such a way that it's a good road. And that's, I think, what the town had planned for. Thank you.
I'm Christine Ward from 29 Castle Hill Avenue, and I've served on the Lake Mansfield Improvement Task Force since the beginning of the task force. And I've served on the task force since the beginning of the task force, so I've had the opportunity to be a part of this very in-depth process that the task force has been involved in. I think it's really important to remember our mission and our primary, as assigned to us by the select board. And our primary mission is to protect the health of the lake, and it was therefore the reason why the Conservation Commission put forward the road closure as the absolute most healthful thing to do for the lake. Personally, I think we have a great responsibility as a community, not only to ourselves and what's wonderful for us today, but what is absolutely vital for the children of the future. And we've seen a great degradation of the lake area due to the impact of the road. We now have an opportunity to turn that around. It's an amazing vision, and it requires some sacrifice. We've spent many years having community forums and gathering information, so our decision is not based on personal wishes, but really on the information that has been provided to us. We've also worked extremely hard to disperse that information in several community forums and to listen to people and to try to understand their priorities in our decision-making process. It's been a very long process. It's been very thorough. And so I urge the select board to take the recommendation of the task force with the understanding that it's made with considerable debate and consideration.
Kate, thanks. Hollenbeck Avenue. I actually have a clarifying question for Chris. So
This way and then we'll
okay. So
disperse it.
based on the meetings that I attended here given by the task force, my understanding was that if we don't succeed, due to the very poor condition of the lake road right now, that if we don't succeed in coming to a consensus on, if you don't succeed in coming to consensus with the task force on a next step to take, that inevitably in some near-term time period, the road will be closed to vehicular traffic, to all of us, without any of the necessary improvements. So that is my understanding, and I should be corrected if I'm wrong about that. But that was my takeaway message from more than one meeting that I attended, and I just wanted to reiterate that because I think that's really important for all of us to remember right now at this time of decision making, that that's the reality we all face, that we're all, very upset about this prospect about closing the road, but it's going to be closed anyway, is what's going to happen. Thank you.
Chris, do you want to respond?
Yeah, unfortunately, as with everything with Lake Mansfield Road, it's not so clear cut. I guess if no decision were made, there's a variety of options that you could pursue. One is do nothing. That's not really an option. If you do nothing, the road will deteriorate. You'll have to close it year-round for good. That's if you do nothing. You can do small maintenance, pothole filling. That will last a month, a week, depending on winter conditions. And the DPW will continue to fill potholes and they'll continue to go into the lake. Not an ideal scenario for anybody. You could do a thick layer of pavement in the short term. That's only a short-term fix. And you could come back in 3, 4, or 5 years and do it again, and you could keep doing that every 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's not the task force recommendation that you undertake such short-term steps. Rather, I think we're looking for a long-term solution. Doing nothing will result in closure. Doing something short-term is not, in the task force opinion, a good solution, a good use of town resources, or good for the lake.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? If not,
Can I clarify one thing?
no, you only get to speak once. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to a fair number of the task force meetings and some of the public forums. I'm sorry, I went to a fair number of the meetings, and the select board asked them to come to us with a recommendation, which they did, and I guess we didn't like it, and we sent them back to do it again, which they did. I feel like they're the ones who have looked into this. They're the ones who've done the hard work and the heavy lifting and the research. And unless we have some reason to not trust them, I'm inclined to trust them and go with their first recommendation.
So am I. Please,
I'd like to make a proposal,
a motion?
a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we accept the Lake Mansfield's task force recommendation that Lake Mansfield Road be closed to traffic between the boat launch and the beach, the number one recommendation.
Do I have a second? Okay, I haven't spoken, I won't go long. The task force thought number 2 was not a doable option. They shouldn't have put it on one of their recommendations. If they felt strongly that number 1 was the only option, then they should have been strong and put it there. So therefore, I think keeping it one way is the right way to go. So I'll vote against it, but I can see both sides of this.
May I ask if we do accept this motion and we do close the road completely, does that happen tomorrow? Does that happen, I'm just wondering how we make sure people know that that's happening and how quickly that would happen, not for any other reason than I just want to make sure that.
I think another question coming to us shortly, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, is what to do in the near term. So we're not deciding that.
Okay, I just
No.
wasn't
Right,
sure if that
that's
was
what
like we're making that vote and then tomorrow no one can access the road. I feel like there
Has to
just
do
needs
with
to be a.
grants, it has to do with.
Great, that was, I just wanted to clarify as I was getting.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And I'm opposed, so it's 4-1, it passes. Okay, are we done with Lake Mansfield? Okay, continuation.